Hi. As you probably know, our sound perception is very loudness dependent. For example, a usual level decrease will make the sound of a track you just listened to at a high level lack bass and brightness, and vice versa. A small increase in volume will make your song sound more appealing. Hence, mixing at some constant level is crucial, otherwise we can easily misjudge our own creation. It becomes even more important at the mastering stage. Unfortunately, the majority of processes we use at our work induce a loudness change. Equalization, compression, saturation, etc. can easily fool our ears, so we need to avoid that somehow. For decades, the only solution mixing and mastering engineers have had was an effects output level controller, and it would work just fine if it were not for human nature that wants everything to be bigger, no matter how big it already is. Eventually, plugins makers introduced an automatic output level control. In plugins from MeldaProduction, you can find it on the right side in the form of two buttons: AGC, Automatic Gain Control, and Set. It does great work. But what if we want to compare our mix to some reference song that has been mastered? Or how about comparing different versions of mastering the same song? Can we rely on our ego? As an answer to these questions, MeldaProduction has come up with an elegant solution by way of the MCompare plugin. The idea is to make the loudness of the reference material and the loudness of our sound source match, and by doing so, we can eliminate human error. As we'll learn, it can also help with monitoring every step in an effective chain or comparing different mastering chains, for example. In order to run the MCompare, we need at least two sound sources: the mix or track we're working on and the reference track. The first one is the MCompare's input signal. For example, if I want to compare my mix to a reference song, I need to insert the plugin into a master channel. However, if I want to check a lead vocal against back vocals, I must insert it into the lead vocal channel. The reference material can be a commercial song, an earlier exported master, or a signal from within your own session. For my first demonstration, I'm going to check the new mix I'm currently working on against a previously mastered track of the same artist. For that, I must insert the MCompare into the master channel of the session. When the plugin is opened for the first time, it'll look close to what I have here. It seems crowded with lots of buttons and controllers. However, most of them are a repetition of each other. We'll learn all of them as we go through the tutorial. If I press play in my host program, the plugin won't do anything. It just passes the audio through. To make it work, I must open the reference track. Look at the bottom half of the user interface. What we're interested in are the buttons called the File 1, File 2, etc. They are identical, and you can load a reference file to each of them. To do that, click on the magnifying glass icon and, in the open browser, find the file you're looking for. Click on the OK button. As you can see, the panel has changed its name to the file's name, and if it's in green, it means the panel is active. In many hosts, you can also drag and drop a file from the File Explorer or Finder on Macs onto a File button. Clicking on the button works like a toggle switch between the input signal and the reference file. If the file's name is in white, then we are hearing the input signal. If the name is in green, then we are hearing the reference. If you wish, you can edit the name by clicking on the pen button. Type the name that you like and click on OK. We can also see a green waveform above the buttons if the corresponding file is ready to be played back. It represents the reference file's waveform. If I press play again, we'll hear the reference file. It sounds much louder than the mix because it's a mastered song. To hear the mix, I need to click on the button. As you can hear, the comparison of such a difference in loudness files is very problematic, and this is when the MCompare comes especially handy. Click on the Automatic Loudness Compensation button, or ALC in short. In a short time, the loudness of both mix and reference is calculated and matched. Now the reference is played back at the same loudness as the mix. That makes their comparison much easier. Note, the loudness is calculated only when your host program is in the playback mode. Another thing to know is if the loudness of the mix is changing during the playback, the reference file loudness will follow it. Sometimes that may work against your wish, since the loudness is continually changing a little. Moreover, if I press stop and then press play again, or if I jump from one marker to another, the loudness may be rematched again depending on the host program. That means we'll hear the reference track at some loud level every time the MCompare recalculates the loudness. To avoid that, turn off the ALC button and press the set instead. Now the MCompare will set a fixed gain value that won't be changed until you press the set button again. If you press it, a new gain value will be set. That brings up a question. Which value is correct? The thing is, the loudness is never static. It constantly changes. So you should expect some loudness scattering each time you click on the set button. However, there are some things we could do to minimize that deviation. First, we could use similar parts of the source and reference tracks. A chorus, for example. Usually, this is the richest part of a song. If we choose the verse in one song and the chorus in another, the loudness matching error can be much higher. Anyway, make sure the button with the reference track is active. Press play and find the beginning and ending of the chorus. For that, double-click on the green waveform to jump to the supposed chorus location. When you've found it, move green bars along the edges of the waveform to the beginning and ending of the chorus. These bars represent a loop in and out markers. Now the MCompare will only use the green part of the waveform, chorus, as the reference. Next, find the chorus in your session. Go back to the MCompare and click on the Set button, a few times if needed. Taking into account that the majority of us can hardly hear a 3 decibel difference, you don't have to be too precise here. That's all. From now on, your reference song's level will stay the same. Frequently, we create several versions of a mix or master, or sometimes we want to open the old session to make small adjustments here and there. And of course, after that, we're going to ask ourselves whether the mix got better. MCompare can easily help us with this task. Simply open the old versions, match the loudness, and you are ready for the ultimate comparison session.
We could take all our wishes to bed, but they'll still be there. We could take all our wishes to bed, but they'll still trying to reverse all the words. Our wishes to bed, but they'll still be there in the morning.
The problem we are faced with is all our files are out of sync with the session and each other. To fix that, first we must activate the sync button on each panel. That will sync the playback position of the session and the files. As you can see, if I jump from one marker to another in the session, my file's playback position, the red bar, will follow. Also note, the files have changed their colors to the dark blue. That's better, but the files are still out of sync. It's happening because they all were exported with blank spaces of a different length at the very beginning. So the second thing we need to do is to detect that difference and eliminate it. In order to do that, simply click on the Detect button. MCompare will calculate the time shift and put it as the start parameter. Wonderful! Now we can finally concentrate on the version comparison.
We could take all our wishes to bed, but they'll still be there in the morning.
MCompare can only detect a few seconds, so if you have a long gap at the beginning of each mix, you may need to set the time shift manually first and then use the Detect button to make the time shift accurate. The last button we need to familiarize ourselves with is the trash. It deletes the file from the panel. The next row of buttons, Source 1, Source 2, etc., is meant to compare signals from within your session. These could be feeds from plugins, in an effect chain, or different tracks. Let's see how it works. Here is my effect chain. It consists of an equalizer, compressor, and mastering limiter. I like to know what the effect that each plugin adds to the overall picture. For that, I insert the MCompare before the equalizer and then between all plugins. I'm going to use these instances as sound source collectors. Let's open the first one. The sample view and files panels can be closed, as I don't need them anymore. Next, I switch to the Generate Source tab. Here, I click on the Listening button, and in a pop-up menu, I select the Generating Source 1. What was just done is I appointed this instance to be a sender of the signal, or according to the MeldaProduction terminology, to be a source generator. The signal is taken from the point where the plugin was inserted and is sent to the main MCompare instance I'll add soon. I do the same with the other two instances of MCompare, selecting the Generating Source 2 and Generating Source 3 accordingly. Up to 4 sources can be created since I'm using 4 slots, but you can have up to 16 of them. Now I need to insert one more instance of the plugin that will collect the generated signals. I'll insert it into the master channel. As you already guessed, these buttons, Source 1, Source 2, and Source 3, represent those 3 instances in the effect chains. Plus, when None button is active, we'll hear a total effect of the whole plugin chain. Before we go any further, here is something to consider. The peaks of the last instance's input signal are going to be limited at 0 decibels. Remember, it's the output of the mastering limiter. It's also going to be the loudest out of all signals that we are about to compare. The peaks of the signals from the sources 1, 2, and 3, however, will stay untouched, and their loudness is much lower than the loudness of the input signal. So when their loudness is matched to the loudness of the input signal, there is a good chance that peak levels will go over 0 decibels. As you know, in a digital domain, signals whose levels exceed 0 decibels will be cut, and it means our monitoring signals will be distorted. As you can see, when I'm monitoring the signal after EQ, its peak level is higher than the one after the limiter, and I'm getting some nasty clipping. To avoid that, I must turn down the volume parameter in the advanced panel. Let's say to -10 decibels. Another option is to lower the master channel fader, and now I don't get any clipping anymore. Another option would be to use the original track as the reference. In this case, you don't have to reduce the volume, but I'm going to leave it to you. See which approach works better for you. We still have one problem to solve. You've noticed, of course, that all 4 versions are a little out of sync. It's because some of the plugins I used introduce a so-called latency, M equalizer linear phase and M dynamics limiter in particular. To fix that, I'm going to apply the detect function, which will compensate it. And now nothing is going to interrupt my attention from checking the plugin's work. Here is one more example of working with the source buttons. This time, I'm going to show you how you could compare different masters of the same song in real time. First, I create 4 tracks and import the same file of the song I want to master into each of them. Next, I apply 3 different versions of effects to the first 3 tracks and leave the last one original. Now I'd like to compare the mastered versions to each other and to the original track. For that, I insert the MCompare as the last plugin at the end of each chain effect. I also insert one more instance into the 4th track that holds the original version. If I press play, I'll get signals of all 3 masters and the original mixed in the master channel. Of course, I can't compare anything in this situation. I'm going to turn down the channels with effects to the silence. And now I can use the MCompare in the original channel to compare all signals. You already know how. So now you know how to compare files and sources. Of course, you can combine these 2 methods and compare to files and sources at the same time. The last tab we need to familiarize ourselves with is the blind test. As the name suggests, here we are given the opportunity to compare different sources without knowing which is which. This is my personal favorite tool for comparison of plugins from different makers. There is nothing to explain here really. Set up tracks with the same audio, organize sources and the original audio as we did in the previous example. Press the play and click on buttons to see which sound you like most of all. When decided, go to the Compare tab. The button you've selected will be in green. Now, let's move to the global settings, the advanced panel. At the top, we see 4 buttons. The first 3 are for monitoring, mid, side and diff. Mid and side buttons let you audition the mid and side signals. For instance, if you want to compare the spatial images. For more information about mid and side modes, please watch the left, right, mid, side surround audio processing tutorial. The diff function is intended for checking the difference between the input and compared signals. Good idea. However, it has some limitations. First of all, these 2 signals have to be in phase. That means we can't use it to compare different equalizer or crossover settings unless they are linear phase. Dynamic processors should be fine. In any case, all audio signals must be perfectly in sync. Check out how this function works correctly. And now, when something went wrong. The Follow button enables the mode when the MCompare follows the playback of your host program. Keep in mind the sync mode when the exact position is needed. If the Follow and sync modes are off, pressing the File button will result in a free file playback.
We could take all our wishes to bed, but they'll still be there.
The slots set the number of file and source buttons. The values can be from 1 to 16. The volume sets the output level. The ALC window parameter defines the time the MCompare takes to estimate the loudness. The higher the value, the slower the loudness fluctuations. If you use the ALC function and it feels like the volume is fluttering, try to increase this parameter. The sync window is responsible for the length of the analysis time which the MCompare uses for syncing files or sources with the input signal. For successful sync, this value must be 30 to 50% higher than an expected time shift. If you remember, in the first example, we experienced a volume burst before the loudness was matched. If this is an issue for you, try the Mute Until ALC button option. When on, the MCompare will mute the output till the loudness is matched. The filter panel holds the high and low pass filters. You could use it to limit the frequency range the MCompare would utilize for the loudness comparison. useful when you want to compare just the bass, for example. Of course, a plugin like this wouldn't be complete without the great metering system we can see on the right-hand side. It's also a great place to see how loudness is changing over time. That's all from me. I hope it was helpful. Happy comparing.